So my name's Chris. I'm going to talk about open source malware and leaked malware. Really, it's a really generic title that lets me talk about a couple of different malware stories. This is the first one. That is the first one, yeah. Anybody recognize this video clip? You can bottle a Club Mate if you want it as well. No one wants that. So this is a Ukrainian TV station. It's about the Christmas 2015 attacks. So there are a bunch of power stations near Kiev. They were attacked. People lost power, about 250,000 people on Christmas Eve. So that was pretty bad. The way they did it, this is a video of the attackers interacting with some SCADA consoles. So someone working in one of the substations actually recorded this on their iPhone, and they can see them manually flicking through the console and then turning off a couple of the circuit breakers. So that was the manual part. But setting up for the attack, they use a few different tools. And the reason I'm talking about this attack is because some of it was open source and it's part of a growing trend. So they had some custom stuff. US published something on them a year before this attack, saying that they had an exploit for General Electric SCADA consoles. There's also something else where they had been exploiting Microsoft Office 2, so iSight, who call these guys Sandworm, published some stuff about them. Particular to this attack, they use Black Energy, which is the malware these guys are really known for. Some people can name them after that. Black Energy itself is an interesting piece of malware. A while ago, you could buy some early versions. It was shared amongst a few people. These guys customized it. It's kind of stuff that they built themselves, kind of stuff that they also just bought commercially. I suppose you could call TeamViewer and RDP. I guess not really commercial malware, but there's something along those lines. What's really nice to see, though, these guys are really big fans of open source, particularly recently. So they've got some nice stuff where they can do TCP over HTTP. I'm sure those of you pen testers probably recognize most of these tools. Got some pretty good web shells. They just lift straight off GitHub. Another SSH backdoor, nice tool to let you run unsigned drivers on Windows. So whenever they need something, they just go and lift it off because they can't build everything. They just haven't got that much time. And then they use it as they go through. And this is part of a growing trend. There's a talk at Kaspersky SAS this year on some other groups that have been using some open source malware, sometimes in place of things that are already built themselves because the open source stuff is better, and doing more effective attacks that way. So after they did these attacks and people had lost their power on Christmas Eve, people started to notice they're on their networks. It turns out that if you take out the power for a large part of the country, people notice. But they came back to regain access on those networks. So there's a post by ESET looking at some of their new malware. At this point, rather than using Black Energy, which is something they've been using for years, going back for ages, they're now using GCAT, which is a really nice little tool straight off of GitHub, and they just use it in place. They kept using the same macro installers they were using before, so people could tie it to the same guys, but now they're using something just straight off of GitHub. And the guy that wrote this on GitHub, he noticed as well that they were using this tool. He was a little bit upset about it. Understandably, he didn't really want to be responsible for this kind of stuff, and it's definitely not his fault that someone abused that, but if you put something out there, obviously you can't control who's going to be using it. Yeah, this is a really extreme case of when that happens, and extreme cases make really bad rules. This is some idiot who at some point thinks he's Al-Qaeda, at other point thinks he's ISIS, and he posts all these YouTube and Facebook videos about how you can use these open source tools to hack into people. And YouTube and Facebook take down these videos straight away, within a couple of hours. Internet Archive still hosts them after a couple of years, so again, the information is still out there. It's all about that kind of proliferation of ideas and tools and stuff. So flash forward 1 year later, this is another bit of research. This one was by ESET again, and they found the same attackers coming back this time into financial networks in Ukraine, but rather than using GCAT, that Gmail backdoor they had, instead they're using something probably inspired by it. Now it's using Telegram for command and control, but otherwise looks very much like the stuff on Gmail. They've also upgraded too, so some of those open source tools they're using before the previous year, they replaced their own. So the one on the left there, that's actually how they're doing TCP over HTTP now. Upgraded their kill disk software too. So they had one thing that would absolutely destroy all the machines on the network, made it hard to recover, made the forensics a bit more tricky as well. Although in these initial attacks, they managed to recover the power quite quickly. And then this is another talk with one of those scary pictures of the anonymous masks in there, looking very terrifying. They came back a year later, less successful that time. And then more recently, yeah, that worked. More recently, there's been a lot of talk about Petya or not Petya or ex-Petya, and who that might be linked to. I haven't seen anything solid. There are a couple of people saying that maybe it's linked to these guys, Sandworm again. I mean, if you hear Ukraine plus destructive, often it is these people, I don't know. But that tool was an interesting mix of differently sourced malware. So in there, there's some open source stuff with Mimikatz, which was pretty successful about helping them spread around networks. Then there's a stolen exploits for Eternal Blue, which is everywhere these days. There's some source code taken from the original Petya 2. And the author of that malware wasn't sure just where that had come from, whether they'd stolen or had been sold on, that kind of thing. And then they'd written some of that code themselves too. So Petya is kind of an interesting example of how you combine all that different things together, something bad can happen. This slide doesn't really have much reference to this talk, but I quite like it, so I put it in. An earlier version before I deleted it this morning because it was taking up too much time. There's a group called WinNTI, quite a messy group of hackers loosely tied together. They use a lot of open source tools recently. They even use GitHub for command control, and they use some of the open source tools for command and control through GitHub. So there's kind of like a meta open source thing going on. There was a post by Trend Micro, and one of their developers, who it turns out is a part-time pig farmer. And in the day, he farms pigs. In the evening, he writes malware. And this is his profile picture. And the reason it's in this talk is because it just makes you wonder what's going on. Because, I mean, the pig's in his bed. And I don't know, it's not very nice to post pictures about developers' personal lives. But in the case of this one, I thought it was funny enough to justify it. So Mirai, another one that everyone will have heard of. Internet of Things botnet, webcams, that kind of stuff being used to DDoS people. The guy that wrote this to prove how bad and powerful his botnet was, he hit Brian Krebs, and it's quite an impressive feat to manage to knock Brian Krebs off of his DDoS control servers. After that, enforcement were after him. Lots of police and stuff were interested in who he was. So as a response, he published the code onto hack forums, so anyone can use it, or the script users then run it. I'm sure you'll all have seen that now there are tons of Mirai botnets out there. So particularly shortly after Mirai, everyone seemed to have their own Mirai botnet. You weren't great if you didn't have your own one, and lots of people were affected. There was even an improved version someone later did, which Symantec wrote up, which went around patching some of the flaws and just letting people know about the issues with Mirai. In that case, it was a full rewrite by someone that knew what they were doing. Weren't the first people, though, to do that. Anyone remember MyDoom? Yeah, I didn't actually remember it until I was looking into it a couple of days ago. Back in 2004, at one point, the worm functionality of this worm was responsible for about 10% of email traffic in the world, which is crazy. It was a really successful damaging worm. Going back to Martin from Talis' talk this morning about worms and how they've been changing. Back in the 2000s, worms were pretty common. This is one of the worst ones. It was DDoSing SCO Linux, if you remember that, and also Microsoft. So they offered $250,000 for anyone who was willing to dob this guy in and tell them who it was. So Microsoft are pretty good at chasing people down, probably because of that. The author gave it away, and then it got the heat off his back at that point. Then it was hard to find out who it was, because then again, all the script kiddies were writing their own version of MyDoom, even some variants still going today. So yeah, this one, I don't know if anyone here is a fan of Aphex Twin, but I found out this week that he wrote a track about MyDoom called W32.MyDoom. It's not one of his best. It's from the album Analord. I think that's how you pronounce it. I won't try that one. Might be something like that. And there's some other tracks there too, so VBS.something, and if you like your music a bit more generic, PW Steeler as well, one of my favorites. So Hidden Tear is a really well-known piece of ransomware. A lot of people have been talking about it because it's seen so often. It's not that great. It's just a couple of hundred lines of Visual Basic. And a guy called Utku, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, he's from Turkey. He released it a couple of years ago when he was at university. And he said the reason was to educate people about how ransomware works so they could learn to better defend it. I think most people know how ransomware works, but fair enough. Maybe he just did it to get his name out there. He wanted to get into the industry. That's what a lot of people do. Has a sense of humor. This is the ransomware message which comes with it. You download it straight out of GitHub and you run it. This is what you get. He says that he likes kebabs. Yeah, he likes kebabs. He doesn't like being drunk. And please send him some bitcoins. And it would only encrypt files in a certain folder in your desktop. It's only a one-line change of code then to make it encrypt your whole disk, but by default, it won't do that. This got a lot of attention on Reddit. There was a thread talking about it. They picked up on some crypto fails in there. There are a lot. I'm not really a crypto guy, so I didn't understand most of it. One of the most obvious ones, though, is that the random key generation there for encrypting the files is based on environment.tickcount, so in .NET, that's system time, 32-bit integer, potentially some issues there. Someone else suggested, too, that maybe we should add a backdoor into hidden tear so we could start to get those files back. He declined the suggestion on the repository on GitHub, but it's a good idea. And of course, it didn't take long before it was being seen in the wild. So this is from a website in Paraguay. I think it's some local utility, something like that. You download some form off there, you get this malware. It's one of the first ones to be running hidden tear. And then Trend Micro wrote a post on this saying this is not a very good idea, just giving away this open source ransomware. Here's why it's dangerous. Here are people being affected. Ukku, who was called the Turkish security group Otko, which is even spelling his name wrong, said, you know what, maybe I can help out here, let me know what the file is, and we can see what we can do. And he did actually decrypt it. So the people on Reddit had a pretty good idea. He followed their advice, and he brute forces the key. So for one thing, system time, 32-bit integer, 2 billion maybe values. My math's not great, but I think when I Googled it, that's what it was. And also, the time that hidden tear starts as well, because you can look for the first files on the disk, and then that gives you kind of a hint. And then he just brute forces either side. And here you can see, I think there are about 40,000 guesses before he got it right. And this idea was actually taken from Bitdefender, who did this with Linux encoder malware, which had a similar kind of issue there. But in the case of in the case of Linux encoder, Bitdefender didn't write the malware. It encrypts your disk 3-4 times. It just goes to a continuous loop because it's really badly written. So you don't get your files back in if you pay. So after these crypto fails, though, he did decide to improve it, which is maybe a bad idea. This time he named it Ida. In an article, he said it was after a girl that he liked, and he wanted to impress her. It's kind of sweet. I'm not sure it worked. And it did fix a lot of those issues. So this is one of the first times it was seen. Let's say that you want to play Far Cry, and it does look like a pretty cool game there with the antlers and stuff. But it's £40 on Steam, which is quite a lot of money. So obviously you're going to Google for a crack. This is one of the first results in Google still, a YouTube video which then leads you to a download. Probably see where this is going. You download Far Cry, and you get this. You don't get Far Cry, you just get this message after your disk's been encrypted. So that sucks, and this is Ida too. And the ransom note is pretty annoying. It's one of the worst ransom notes I've seen, actually. You'll never be able to find me. I've been doing this for 5 years. Best Buy can't undo the encryption. The NSA can't undo the encryption. Kind of equates Best Buy with the NSA in terms of crypto abilities there, so he knows what he's talking about. But at this point, Ukku had actually taken people's advice, and he had added a backdoor this time. So probably violating the CMA, he could log into the C2 of Ida, and then he could get back all the keys. And he got people their files back. This did work. He had all the keys, gave them away, and I guess score one for him at that point. After that, though, the problem with your code being out there is anyone can fork it, anyone can improve it, and someone did do that. Someone improved Ida 2 and removed even more of those crypto fails in there. They said the motivation for this one, to help law enforcement understand what script kiddies and some ransomwares work like. So law enforcement, I'm sure, are very thankful about that. He actually missed, though, the author of this fork missed the backdoor, though, even after all this attention. Someone suggested to him on GitHub to remove it, and he did. So the backdoor's now gone from Stolik as well. So let's say you want to play Minecraft. Again, great game, but you don't want to pay for Minecraft. You download this backdoored copy, and you get this. I think this is laughing my arse off at use ransomware, something like that. Not sure how to pronounce it. So yeah, this is Stolik. You can't get your files back, at least not that I'm aware of. After this was seen in the wild, I guess the author maybe had a change of heart. They took it down from GitHub, so you can't download it from that repository anymore. When I was looking into this, looking at the author, turns out he's a 13-year-old kid from India. So I feel a bit more bad for the guy now at this point. I mean, it's not a very smart thing to do maybe, but a lot of us have done dumb stuff when we were kids. Maybe not write ransomware though. Talking of risks, this kid in Japan a couple months ago, he did write some ransomware as a demonstration, shared the code, was never seen in the wild, so I'm aware, and he got a knock on the door from the police, and I'm not sure what happened to him in the end, actually, but certainly in some countries, writing even demonstration ransomware is pretty serious. Here's the last one, I think. Another EDA2 variant. Yeah, quite a boring note this time, though. But what happened this time, though, was that the web hosts were pretty good. After they were told that there was this ransomware using their stuff as a C2, they took down the command and control server. And that meant that Utku could not log in anymore and download those keys. So he just couldn't get people's files back, even though this still had the back door in it. So that sucks. And then people started posting on Bleepy Computer, which is a good forum if you ever get your stuff encrypted. And they're asking for help, that kind of thing. The ransomware guy delivering this stuff took pity on some people. He said, you know what, I can actually get your files back. I made a backup of the keys before this all went down. We had a condition, and that was that Utku had to actually send him 3 Bitcoin. He didn't like the guy, apparently. And he also had to take down Hidden Tear and EDA2 from GitHub. So those are the conditions. And after a bit of mediating and quite an aggressive back and forth on the forum, he did that. And now they are gone. So the repositories for these two are no longer up. But if you look on the commit history, you can still get it, of course. Didn't delete the commit history. And the other thing, again, about your code being out there is once it's out there, it really is out there. So there are tons of forks of EDA2 and Hidden Tear on GitHub, all still available. There are some improved versions up there as well. So someone rewrote it in C++ for some reason. If you can code that, I'm sure you can probably write your own ransomware that's better than the VB stuff. But yeah, lots of different versions. And it's being seen in the wild a lot now. So this is actually a real problem. It's not just some toy malware. These are some of them. My personal favorite is Santa Claus smoking a joint after you've been encrypted. Yeah, some more ones, loads of them. This is just pulled off Twitter. These screenshots are mostly from other people, particularly Bleepy Computer, so credit to them. This one I was told, yeah, I really wanted to believe this one was real, but I was told this was actually made as a joke by someone. I don't know if it's real or not. I checked into the phone number, and it has been seen as some real tech support scams. But yeah, it's the Microsoft Windows support, Zeus virus. Yeah, that phone number no longer works, but I found a later version which had this phone number, and that number does work. If you want to give them a call, maybe we can get the last speaker to try talking to them. This one looks shit, but it plays the Harry Potter theme tune, which is quite eerie. This one just deletes all your files. So going back to kill this type malware and some of the destructive ransomware attacks, this is kind of a bad version of that. It just deletes everything. This one might look familiar. I guess what this is trying to look like. Yeah, WannaCry, yeah. Some person named WannaCry, I guess they thought they'd get more money that way. This one was kind of a joke. Someone, you might have seen a couple of articles talking about this one. This makes you play this very obscure anime game up to an extremely high level and checks the memory to make sure you got the score, which takes hours and hours, I'm told, and then you get your files back. So you have to get really good at this game, and then you get it back. Yeah. But the author of this felt bad, so they released a patch which will actually patch memory to make it seem like you got that score, and they apologized too. But this is all based on Hidden Tear. That's why I'm showing these. These aren't just random bits around somewhere. This one just gives you the key straight away. It claims it's educational. These have all been seen in the wild, well, they're seen on Vice Total, so either researchers or maybe in the wild. This one kind of scares me, seeing a few of this one. So this is ransomware as a service using Hidden Tear. So this guy would charge you $200, and he'll set up the Hidden Tear server for you, and he'll even help you distribute that malware too. So he's taken this open source stuff, and now he's making cash off of it, which seems a little bit unfair. In terms of how much ransomware has come from Hidden Tear these days, this is a really nice graph by F-Secure, not of Hidden Tear, but just all ransomware overall, just showing there's a big growth in families. I went through tagging which ones are Hidden Tear, but it got quite boring. But it was about 10% when I was going through. Better numbers by Trend Micro actually did bother doing that. That's shot up now. It's being seen more, I'd say. It's pretty easy to fork. I mean, all you've got to do is download the code off of GitHub, change the desktop, and then you're there. So when I used to write hacking tutorials as a teenager, I used to put on there educational use only, that kind of thing. I'm not sure it really has any value, but it made me feel better. Utku put that on Hidden Tear, said for educational use only. If you're doing that, I guess you know you're doing something a little bit sketchy, but there you go. Apparently, open source license explicitly does not, well, the GPL does not let you dictate the usage of your software. I'm not an open source lawyer, but I saw someone else say that, and they seem to know what they're talking about. Similarly, I saw someone else talking about VASNR, and they said that that does not apply, so that arms control and cyber weapon control stuff doesn't control the open source. It has some explicit get-out clauses. So I guess if you're looking at the legal side of how you can distribute open source stuff, that might be relevant. And then finally on hidden tear, Tusek, probably best known as Malware mate, he posted this on GitHub asking, do you think open source ransomware is a good, useful thing or not? I don't know. For me, I'm not really sure. I think that GitHub probably can't blame them for hosting it, but at the same time, it's not really a great idea to publish it. So these slides look really horrible, so I apologize in advance if it hurts your eyes. But every good talk has a couple of graphs in. This is a very lightweight graph. So just in the context of this talk and the next section, you could describe malware and where people are getting it from as maybe being bespoke stuff you write yourself. So maybe you write a little Visual Basic thing that just downloads and executes something, takes you like 10 minutes to write. And maybe you write Stuxnet and you spend $100 million building your own proper platform. With commercial stuff, generally the more you pay, the more you get. So you can buy a copy of the Black Shades rat to spy on your ex-girlfriend for $40. The FBI might knock on your door at that point. You can go up to Cobalt Strike if you're a professional pen tester. I haven't got that background, but I hear it costs a few grand, maybe for Cobalt Strike, something like that. Going up to Hacking Team, more kind of government grady, but still off the shelf, maybe 6-7 figures to buy something like that. Open source levels the playing field. You can get some, well, there's tons of open source stuff out there, obviously, and it's great. It really helps people do their jobs. You can get some things like HWorm, which is a bit destructive because they are a worm. It's a pretty rubbish piece of VB script, a couple hundred lines. It's quite successful, though, through to Metasploit, which is obviously a very useful, very powerful platform, and you get a lot for nothing. The stuff that really worries me, though, is the leaked malware. So there's commercially leaked stuff like the Zeus banking malware. That source code is leaked. That's seen in tons of banking malware these days. Carburp, another piece of banking malware. And then there's the shadow broker stuff. And this has been done to death, so I won't go into too much. But when you have those kind of government-grade exploits and basically really expensive stuff going out there, that's when you start to get real problems because it drops from being up there in terms of cost down to being there really suddenly. And then that's how things like WannaCry can happen. Yeah, so on to the next bit, leak source code, kind of complementing the open source stuff. Shadow brokers was the most famous one. I think there's some more coming out today. Everyone knows about that stuff. What I found interesting was when people first copied it over onto GitHub, so it'd be easy to access, GitHub took it down. And it wasn't because there was all that malware on there and all that stuff. It was because they included the auction message from the shadow brokers, and they were asking for Bitcoin donations. And you're not allowed to solicit for donations on GitHub. That's just one of their no-no rules. Fair enough. You're also not allowed to put compiled malware on there as well. That's not okay. But you can put scripts on there. You put the source code. And then that becomes a problem when you start to see people, I've definitely seen it on networks, people just downloading Invoke Mimikatz, the PowerShell version, straight off of GitHub in a one-liner and then running. And then when you're trying to investigate an intrusion like that from the network level without termination, you just see an encrypted connection to GitHub and then something shit happens. So that's quite dangerous. But GitHub have got kind of a tough job to do. In WannaCry, there have been a couple of talks on WannaCry today. I thought they're both very good. One that Martin from, I think it was Martin from Talus, spoke about. He was talking about how they use the actual exploit itself, the Eternal Blue exploit, and kind of which bits they used. There's a great post by BE analyzing which particular form of that exploit they used. It wasn't until about a month after it was initially released that WannaCry happened. It was 2 days after someone released a more pre-packaged version of the exploit onto GitHub. And 2 days after that, WannaCry attackers reused it and at that point it was a bit easier to use. And just after that, then a Metasploit. And whenever something's in Metasploit, that's when you start to see it used in the wild. So the Apache Struts exploit right now, that's just been a Metasploit. It's going to start being seen everywhere. And that's how these things go, obviously. Most people can't be bothered to work out how to do their own exploit, but once it's easy to use, it's going to get used. Yeah, and they made the comment too, they didn't understand how the exploit works, of course, they just whacked it in there. Hacking Team, pretty famous. Before we had them up there as one of those quite expensive commercial grade things. They do some interesting stuff. They sell to do things like counterterrorism, which I think most people think is quite important. They also sell some countries to hack into journalists and people that just disagree with the government. So some people didn't like that and then hacked into them. It's quite a famous story, obviously. And all this stuff is now openly available, including GitHub if you want to download all their stuff. Didn't take long before the exploits, as well as some of the other tools from Hacking Team, have been seen in the wild. And what's interesting in terms of, again, how these kind of tools have been distributed If you look at a lot of Chinese groups, there seems to be a digital quartermaster. That's a phrase by Nemaran of Facebook and Shadow Server. But there's one central entity which will sometimes build their own tools, sometimes repackage exploits like the hacking team exploits, and then share them out to the other groups. And again, that's just one way this kind of malware and exploits get proliferated. In that case, it's a bit more organized. They really help those guys out. So a bit more on leaked stuff, but this time more commercial grade things. So Zeus and Carburp, I think everyone's heard of these. Zeus again, very famous piece of banking malware. Carburp, that was really successful for a while. They made tens of millions of dollars hacking into banks. And this video, another one for my personal collection. You can see I spend a lot of time looking at Russian news websites and things. You can't really see what's going on yet, but yeah. Don't worry, he's laughing in a minute. I know that looks harsh, but he's laughing with the police in a second. It's not quite so bad. This is all the stuff he had. So this is what happens when you are based out of Russia and you start hacking into banks in Russia. This guy was one of the leaders of Carburp. He and his brother were leading this gang that were making millions of dollars, not just out of Russian banks, but lots of other places too. He was employing people remotely, so you'd be paid a couple of grand maybe to write a web inject for Barclays, a couple of grand to write one for NatWest, and then they all pulled it together. So Carburp was a pretty nice piece of kit. It was a very professional banking Trojan until he got arrested. It was really top up there. And then what happened both with Carburp and also with Zeus was that not long after the authors were arrested, the source code first became available on forums for maybe $10,000, $20,000 and quite quickly descended down to 500 and then on GitHub and everywhere else. And now anyone can use all these bits. And it is seen in lots of different places. So a couple of the more interesting uses of the Carburp source code is that Sofaki, probably best known as Fancy Bear or APT28, they've been in the news a lot recently for some stuff with the US elections. They use a bit of Carburp, they use a bit of everything. They also use some Metasploit too, because even though they're a very well-funded organization, why wouldn't they? They were the topic of a talk at Kaspersky SAS, which went specifically into their use of open source software, so I won't go into that, but one of the interesting things that they raised was that they have their own exploit kit they use to deliver malware. They've had that for some time, but in some instances they just use beef instead. So they've spent this time building up all this stuff, but they also like to use open source. And maybe it's to make attribution more difficult, maybe it's just better, maybe some of the guys don't like sharing amongst the teams. I don't know. And also Vault 7, allegedly CIA, that included showing that even they used Carburp for one thing. And in their own user manual, they made the note that all components were carefully analyzed for backdoors and vulnerabilities. And obviously that is something to be pretty careful of if you're reusing this code. I know a lot of people in proper full-on red teams are, in APT simulations, are using real live malware. You have to do a lot of testing to make sure you know what's going on in there. It does make a more realistic test though. And then going on to this kind of proliferation of all the different bits of malware and how it's all coming together, it's really crazy to think about how a lot of the shadow broker stuff, which is allegedly from the US government, in the context of there was looking at some of those tools and the notes around it, a lot of them were probably made to attack Iran's nuclear program, and then they're probably leaked by another country, and then looking at WannaCry, there's some pretty good evidence by Symantec and others that might be linked to North Korea to fund their nuclear program, and I won't go into it because attribution isn't something I'm going to go into here, not in any detail which I'll be happy with, but it's just mad to think that stuff built for the Iranian nuclear program to stop it was maybe inadvertently funding a little bit the North Korean one. Yeah, it really does happen to everyone. So Fancy Bear, Sofaki, those guys I was talking about a minute ago using Carburp and lots of other stuff. They left one of their servers open, actually left two servers open, and their back-end source code, one of their pieces of malware, was then just open to the world, and now researchers have hold of it. And another company even has the other client side of this too, to build the malware, to interact with this server side. So that means that these guys, that are a very well-known group, some people have some of their malware if they wanted to redeploy it themselves. And that led this guy, who some of you may know, Jeffrey Carr, to say that based on that fact that some people have control of their malware, you can no longer say with any certainty who is using their malware. And based on that, he was saying that Russia in no way linked to the US election hacks. He also says that Stuxnet was China and that APT1 were not China. So, interesting guy. Juan, who will be talking next, with a very dramatic Twitter picture there. I think he's just having a little sleep in the bar right now. He did a really good talk, but I have to be very careful talking about attribution though. So whilst just because a tool is open source doesn't mean that you have no idea who's using it. At the same time, a lot of people do screw with you, and this does mean that you can never be sure sometimes. So it's nice to end on a slightly more positive note about all these kind of things. Is there an upside to the fact that people are reusing this malware, stuff's getting leaked? There are a couple of things. For one thing, there's use banking malware that is used in pretty much all banking Trojans, or at least the cheap ones. It's pretty easy to detect. On some of the basic versions, you can pick up some mutex or some of that kind of thing. The AV detection is very good. So that's why malware authors advertise that their malware is not based on Zeus if they're selling banking stuff, because it really decreases the value. So leaked code maybe has slightly less value once it's out and everyone can see it. Another interesting thing was right after Carburp code got leaked, Xylitol took a look at the PHP server-side code of it, and even though this was fairly professionally developed between lots of different people, a lot of money went into the development of Carburp, there's some exploits in there. So he just logged into a couple of their CT servers, started pulling data off there, which is pretty crazy. So there were some of the victims from quite an organized crime group. And once something is open source, it does make it easy to find some of these backdoors. And again, there was another talk I saw recently on someone looking at open source malware and finding it easy to find backdoors there. There's obviously the whole separate conversation about whether open source is more secure or not, but that's another thing. And then finally, I put this on Twitter yesterday. It's nice to actually share some kind of code, something useful when you do a talk. So I polished this off to get it working for this talk. And if you Google Yabin, which is a conflation of Yara being the tool to find malware samples, and binary being a binary. This thing, all this does is quite a simple, dirty Python script. If you give it a compiled piece of malware or software, it'll look for potential code reuse, or write a rule to try and find related malware. So it does that. You can look at the code about how it works. Only works in some circumstances. It looks at the function prologues. Some compilers often have the same kind of stack set up, that kind of thing, so you can see where these functions begin. Just looks at the start of it. There are better, more complex ways of doing this, but this is one way of doing it. I ran this. These two are for a group called Lazarus, quite well known for the Sony stuff. Oh, you're there. How's it going? I showed a photo of you a minute ago. I think you missed it, but that's for the best. Yeah, so they use some open source stuff. And then using this tool, I ran it. I could find related malware based on the original open source things we're doing. Also some other stuff in there. So I found a nice old Lazarus worm, which is quite nice, dating back a few years, doing SMB brute forcing. Given these guys are supposed to be also behind WannaCry. It'll be interesting finding more of their worms. Another one I was looking at, it looks for, it specs a couple of pieces of software to be on your system. It checks if they're there or not. And looking at that software, it's part of the North Korean standard build. So that's just an interesting thing. Why is this worm looking for North Korean software in people's machines? I haven't properly looked at it yet, so I don't know why, but it'd be interesting to find out. So yeah, this is a tool to find related malware. Check it out. So yeah, thanks to a bunch of people for screenshots that I just stole. I tried to credit them, but didn't always fit. So there you go. And that's it. If there are any questions from anyone, glad to answer them.